Today I'll be presenting my behavioral economics research project that I completed this summer with Professor Goldman from Carnegie Mellon University. And the way that I'll be structuring this presentation is that I'll be talking about the different parts of my research project and also highlighting some challenges that I faced along the way and how I overcame those challenges. So a little bit about myself. I'm currently a rising senior at St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire. Inside the classroom, I'm interested in behavioral economics and also Asian studies, which I'll talk more about later. And outside of the classroom, I like to play tennis and I also like to take photos. The research question that I chose to investigate for this project was the effect of familial bonds on risk tolerance within East Asians. And risk tolerance in this study I defined as the willingness of investors to withstand any losses that may occur. I was interested in researching this because of my personal observations of the differences in the American education system and in the Chinese education system as I studied in both countries. And I noticed that the participation levels among students was very different, and so was the teaching style, as Chinese classrooms were more lecture-based, while American classrooms had more participation, whether that be through classroom discussions or group projects. And I found this to be very interesting. So at the end of last year, I did a research project on how this affected the personalities of students and, on a larger scale, the cultural values and how these tied into the education systems. So this summer I decided to focus on one cultural value of East Asian cultures in particular, which was family, as family is very important. And I decided to investigate how that kind of crossed with behavioral economics. So, naturally I did a lot of reading and I looked at past research and past studies done on how different cultures affect risk tolerance. And my initial thoughts, were in line with studies from Perriman and Doyle and Douglas and Wildavsky, which argued that there was a negative relationship between Asian cultural values and risk tolerance, meaning that as the presence of Asian cultural values increased, for example, collectivism was stronger within an individual, this meant that they had a lower risk tolerance. However, after doing more research and looking at the literature reviews of these studies and more studies in general, I found that in fact there was another line of thinking that argued that there was a positive relationship between Asian cultural values and risk tolerance. And so some of these studies included Weber and C and Fan and Xiao, and they argued the cushion hypothesis, which kind of argued that Asian students were more risk tolerant because of their culture, because of values like collectivism. For example, they were able to take more risks as they knew that their families and friends would support them if they, incurred an economic loss. And so, therefore, they were less risk averse, and there was, a positive relationship between increased Asian values and increased risk tolerance. And this ended up being my hypothesis for this study, as I believe that as familial importance increased, risk tolerance would also increase within East Asians. And so the way that I conducted this study was I recruited participants off of Prolific, which is a platform for recruiting participants for studies. And I had 184 participants in the end who were ethnically Asian and also did not live with their parents. And the reason for this was because of the framing questions I used in my survey. So I made a survey using SurveyMonkey. I had two groups of participants as I asked the two groups two different sets of framing questions. And the questions were, how often did they visit their parents and how often did they call their parents? And you'll see in the next slide the specific questions and answer choices. But essentially, the first group had answer choices that made them feel that they visited or called their parents relatively less. And the second group had question choices that made them feel that they visited their parents relatively more. And the goal of this was to kind of cause the two groups to have different perceptions of how much they valued their family relative to others, We checked this manipulation through a manipulation check by asking participants how important their family was. And the last part of the survey was a payoff lottery in which participants had 10 choices between option A and option B. And by picking these two options, it showed how risk tolerant participants were. And as participants went down the list, option A became riskier, option B became safer. And when they switched between these two options, showed how risk tolerant they were. So the results from the framing questions you can see displayed on the screen. On the left is group 1 and on the right is group 2. And as you can see, it achieved the result that we had hoped, as participants in group 1 tended to pick the option choice on the left side of the graph, which shows that relative to others, they visit their parents less. And on the right, relative to others, they visit their parents or call their parents more, which we hope would cause the effect of them seeing their family as more or less important. We checked this through a manipulation check, and as you can see, group 2, which was the group we framed to value their family more, did in fact say that they valued their family more. We did a t-test and found a p-value of 0.082, which showed that results were significantly different at 90%. However, in the second question of the lottery choice, we found the p-value was only 0.29, so this is the graph on the right, which showed that results were not significantly different. Therefore, it means that familial importance did not, in fact, have an effect on risk tolerance, which was a challenge I faced, as I did not expect this in my hypothesis. So in my discussion, I had to find other reasons for why this result came to be. And so this leads me on to my discussion. So after talking with my professor and coming up with different ideas to explain these results, I had 3 arguments. So the first could have been that there in fact is no correlation between familial importance and risk tolerance. The second is that sources of error could have occurred in my experiment. So one could have been that the manipulation was not strong enough. So this meant that participants did not value their family, or participants could have valued their family more or less. And second is that the lottery choice was not a good measurement of risk tolerance. So other measurements include questionnaires or surveys to gauge risk tolerance. And lastly, an explanation could have been that familial closeness, in fact, both increases and decreases risk tolerance. And so these two factors balance each other out. Therefore, we got the result of a no effect of familial importance on risk tolerance. And so the biggest takeaways that I had from this research paper was obviously first to adapt to unexpected results. I didn't expect to get the results that I did. However, I learned to adapt and use my critical thinking abilities to come up with different answers to explain these results. I was also willing to take risks, as this was an area that had not been researched before. And so I was happy that I took a risk in knowing that I didn't know what result would come out. And I think that I learned a lot in the process. And lastly, I obviously learned a lot of general research skills. And so the next steps is that I hope to submit my paper for publication. And obviously I hope to continue researching, whether that be, in my last year of high school and university, or, during the summers and during the winter breaks. And I will use the skills that I learned, which include, recruiting participants, conducting and making surveys, and also analyzing results off Microsoft Excel that I learned through, my time this summer to continue research. And so that is the end of the presentation, and I really enjoyed my opportunity this summer to research. Thank you for watching.